Imagine working the same job for almost 3 decades, and then, one morning, you're called into an office you've never been in before. Two people are sitting there, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. They slide a paper across the table, and in less than a minute, your entire career, your income, your stability is gone. Just like that. Now imagine you're 55 years old, with bills to pay, no savings, and the world telling you you're too old to start over. That's exactly what happened to me, and I was ready to give up completely until I found something buried in my garage that would change everything. I had no money, no plan, and no idea what I was doing, but that one moment turned into a chain of events that took me from rock bottom to running one of the most talked about businesses in my city. Here's how it happened. You know that moment when your whole life changes in a single phone call? For me, it happened at exactly 9:13 a.m. on a rainy Thursday. I was sitting in my small, beige office, sipping burnt coffee from the vending machine, staring at spreadsheets that all blurred into one dull mess. I'd been at the same job for 27 years, customer accounts manager for a mid-sized insurance firm. The kind of place where the walls are beige, the chairs squeak, and nobody talks above a whisper. That morning, the phone on my desk rang. My first thought? Probably another client asking about claim forms. I had no idea it was about to be the last time I'd ever answer a call from this company. It was my manager, Dan. His voice was unusually stiff. Could you come to the conference room? Bring your employee badge. I laughed nervously. Why? Did I win an award? Silence. 5 minutes later, I was sitting across from Dan and a woman from HR I'd never met before. They didn't even look me in the eyes. Dan slid a single sheet of paper toward me. We're restructuring. Your position is being eliminated. We appreciate your years of service. Years of service. 27 years reduced to one sentence. I stared at the paper, my mind spinning. My throat felt tight. I walked out of the building carrying a small cardboard box with my name on it. Inside, a stapler, 3 pens, and a picture of my daughter at her high school graduation. It was raining harder now. I remember thinking the weather was mocking me. You see, I wasn't just losing a job. I was losing everything. The routine, the security, the identity I'd built over decades. I was 55 years old, with a mortgage, a car loan, and a daughter about to start college. Nobody hires a 55-year-old in my line of work. For the next few weeks, I woke up every day at 6 a.m. like I always did, but instead of going to work, I just sat at the kitchen table. My wife tried to be supportive, but I could see the worry in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. Friends stopped calling. The phone that used to ring nonstop for work was now silent. I sent out 47 job applications in the first month. Not one reply. The thought started to creep in. Maybe this is it. Maybe I'm done. It's terrifying, feeling invisible in a world you've worked so hard to be part of. Then, one afternoon, I was cleaning the garage when I stumbled across something buried under a pile of dusty boxes. An old, rusted espresso machine. It had been a gift from my late father, who used to own a tiny coffee stall at the local market back in the 70s. I remembered how, as a kid, I'd watch him work the machine, the smell of freshly ground beans filling the air, customers laughing and chatting while he poured steaming cups. That stall had been his pride, until it closed when a big chain moved into town. I stood there, holding that old machine, and something stirred inside me. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was an idea. I didn't know it yet, but that moment, standing in a dusty garage with a forgotten piece of family history, was the first step towards something that would change everything. Because in less than a year, I'd go from being a laid-off nobody to running one of the most talked-about coffee shops in the city. But back then, all I had was a broken machine, an empty bank account, and a spark. That night, I set the old espresso machine on the kitchen counter. It was dented, scratched, and missing one knob, but I plugged it in anyway. A low hum filled the room. The thing still worked. Barely. I made a cup of coffee, my first in years from a real machine. The smell hit me first, deep, rich, familiar. One sip, and I swear I could almost hear my dad's voice telling stories over the hiss of steam. I couldn't stop thinking, what if? Of course, the logical side of me screamed, you're 55. You don't have the money. You don't have the time. You don't know how to run a business. But there was another voice, quieter but stubborn. you've got nothing left to lose. The next morning, I called my old friend Mike. We hadn't talked much since he moved away, but he'd once run a small bakery. Mike, hypothetically speaking, how crazy would it be for a guy like me to open a coffee shop? There was a pause. Then he laughed. Pretty crazy, but maybe crazy is what you need right now. Over the next week, I dove in head first. I watched hours of videos on latte art, read everything I could about roasting beans, and scribbled ideas in a notebook. Names, menus, pricing. I felt alive for the first time in months. Then reality hit. Starting a business costs money, a lot of money. And my savings? Almost gone. I decided to start small. I cleared out half the garage and turned it into a makeshift cafe space. Borrowed a folding table from my neighbor, bought 2 second-hand stools from a yard sale, and used my dad's espresso machine as the centerpiece. My wife looked at the setup and said gently, "It's charming," which I knew was code for "this looks insane." But on Saturday morning, I put a hand-painted sign outside. Free coffee, donations welcome. At first, nobody came, just the sound of cars passing. Then a woman walking her dog stopped. Coffee? At 8 a.m.? Why not? I handed her a steaming cup, praying it didn't taste terrible. She took a sip and smiled. "How much?" "Just whatever you think it's worth." She dropped a $5 bill in the jar. By noon, I'd served 14 cups and made $62. It wasn't much, but it was proof. The next weekend, more people showed up. A man in a suit said he'd heard about my coffee from a coworker. 2 teenagers stopped by after skateboarding. Word was spreading. Then disaster. On the 3rd weekend, right when I had a small crowd waiting, the espresso machine sputtered, hissed, and died. I stood there, heart pounding, as people shuffled awkwardly, checking their watches. One guy muttered, "Well, that's that." That night, I sat in the dark garage, staring at the lifeless machine. I felt stupid, foolish, like I'd been playing dress-up as a businessman. Maybe I was too old. Maybe people were just being polite. But then my daughter walked in, holding her laptop. "Dad," she said, "I found a refurbished machine online. It's not fancy, but it works. And I've been saving for college. I can lend you the money." I shook my head. "Sweetheart, no. That's your future." She smiled. "You're my future, too." 2 days later, a big brown box arrived. Inside was a modest but reliable espresso machine. We set it up together, testing it until midnight. The following Saturday, I was back in business. And this time, I wasn't giving it up. Not after everything. But I still didn't realize that bigger challenges were coming. Ones that would make a broken coffee machine look like nothing. Because soon, I'd take a leap that could either make my dream real or destroy it before it even began. The garage cafe was fun, but deep down I knew it wasn't enough. If I wanted to make a living from this, I had to step into the real world. One night, while scrolling through rental listings, I saw it. A tiny corner shop, just 3 blocks from downtown. Big windows, sunlight pouring in, and best of all, cheap rent. Well, cheap by city standards. The next morning, I went to see it. It smelled faintly of dust and paint. The floor was scratched, the walls bare, but I could see it. A counter here, stools there, the air filled with the smell of coffee beans. The landlord, a short man in a wrinkled shirt, said, "It's been empty for years. Everyone who tries to run a business here gives up." I should have taken that as a warning. Instead, I signed the lease. The moment I held the keys, panic set in. I had no real equipment, no decor, no staff, just me a second-hand espresso machine and a bank account that looked like it was on life support. I spent the next month transforming the space. I painted the walls a warm amber color, hung up vintage coffee posters, and built the counter myself with scraps of wood from a construction site, with permission mostly. By the time opening day came, I'd invested every last cent I had. I needed this to work. I arrived at 5 a.m. that morning, nervous but excited. By 6:30, I had fresh pastries from a local baker, beans from a small roastery, and music playing softly. At 7 o'clock, my first customer walked in. At 7:15, my second. By 8:30, I had a small but steady line. People smiled, said the coffee was different, in a good way. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd pulled it off. Then, at exactly 9 o'clock, I looked out the window, and my heart sank. Across the street, workers were putting up a sign. Grand opening, Brew House Coffee. a massive, gleaming franchise cafe, the kind with corporate ads, glossy menus, and a marketing budget bigger than my entire life savings. Within hours, they had banners, free drink coupons, and a line stretching around the block. By day 3, my sales had dropped by half. By day 5, I was serving maybe 10 customers a day. One night, I stayed late cleaning the empty shop, thinking about how foolish I'd been. I'd gone all in, only to get crushed by a giant. That's when a young man in a leather jacket walked in. "You the owner?" he asked. "Yeah. You're a little late for coffee. I was about to close." He grinned. "Good. I don't want coffee. I want to help." His name was Leo. Turns out, he was a local graphic designer who'd seen my shop and liked the vibe. He said, "The chain can't beat you at personality. Let's make your shop the place people talk about." Over the next week, Leo redesigned my logo, created bright flyers, and suggested I start hosting open mic Fridays, live music, poetry, whatever people wanted to share. I was skeptical, but on the first Friday night, the place was packed. Students, musicians, artists, office workers, all crammed into my little shop, sipping coffee, laughing, clapping. And for the first time since the chain opened, I didn't feel invisible. But competition wasn't my only problem. I was still dangerously close to running out of money. If I couldn't keep this momentum going, all the music and laughter in the world wouldn't save me. The question was, how far was I willing to push myself? And what was I willing to risk to keep this dream alive? For a few weeks, things were good. Not great, but good. The Friday night events kept people coming in, and a few regulars even started showing up every morning before work. But good doesn't pay the rent, and the rent was due in 12 days. I sat in my tiny back office late one night, staring at my bank statement. After paying for beans, pastries, utilities, and Leo's modest design fee, I had just $483 left. Rent alone was $1,100. The numbers didn't lie. If I didn't come up with the money fast, the landlord would lock the doors, and the dream would be over before it really began. I tried everything. I handed out flyers on street corners. I offered buy one, get one free deals. I even stood outside the chain cafe across the street, telling people my coffee was better. Some laughed. Some ignored me. A few gave me a pity sale. One night, after closing, I found my wife sitting at the kitchen table with a pile of bills. She looked at me quietly and said, "Maybe it's time to stop. We can't lose the house over this." I didn't answer. I couldn't, because deep down I knew she was right, but I also knew that if I walked away now, I'd carry the weight of that failure for the rest of my life. The next day, I sat in the shop long after closing, lights off, staring out the window at the glowing sign of the chain cafe. Their line was still wrapped around the block. I felt like a kid watching the popular crowd from the outside. Then my phone buzzed. It was Leo. "Got an idea. Meet me at the shop tomorrow at 6 a.m. The next morning, he walked in with a camera, a tripod, and a box of pastries from a bakery halfway across town. "People need to see you," he said. "Not just your coffee. Your story. We're going to make you the 55-year-old who started over." He filmed me making coffee, telling my story, the layoff, the garage cafe, the broken machine, everything. We posted it online with a caption, "When life fires you at 55, start brewing something new." We didn't expect much, but by that evening, the video had 12,000 views. Comments poured in. "This man is living my dream. I'm coming by tomorrow. Support small business." The next morning, I walked into the shop and froze. The line was out the door. I brewed nonstop for 6 hours. My hands were shaking, my voice hoarse, but I'd never felt more alive. We made enough in 3 days to cover rent, and then some. For a brief moment, I thought we'd made it. But life doesn't give happy endings that easily. Because a week later, I got a letter from the city. A permit issue. Someone had reported that my shop wasn't up to code. If I didn't fix it within 30 days, they'd shut me down. The repairs would cost more than I had. I was back at the edge of the cliff, and this time, there was no going halfway. I had 2 choices, close up or risk everything I'd left to fight for the dream. And I was about to make the most reckless decision of my life. I stared at the letter from the city until the words blurred. 30 days. 30 days to fix the plumbing, upgrade the electrical wiring, and install a proper ventilation system, or lose everything. I called 3 contractors. The cheapest quote, $8,400. I had maybe a quarter of that in the bank. For 2 nights, I barely slept. I kept hearing my wife's voice. We can't lose the house over this. I kept picturing the shop, the warm amber walls, the smell of coffee, the faces of the regulars, turning dark and silent. On the 3rd night, around 2 a.m., I made my choice. I wasn't giving up. Not now. Not when I come this far. The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. I posted online asking for help. I told my story, all of it. The layoff at 55, the garage cafe, the competition from a chain, the Friday open mics, and now the city deadline that could shut me down for good. I offered prepaid coffee cards, $50 for 10 drinks, redeemable anytime. I promised anyone who helped would have their name painted on the shop's wall of thanks. While I hit post, I expected maybe a few friends to pitch in. But within hours, orders started coming in. Not just from locals, from people across the country. Messages poured in. I don't even live near you, but I believe in you. My dad started over at 60. Here's to new beginnings. Keep brewing, my friend. By the end of the week, I had enough not only to pay for the repairs, but to upgrade the shop in ways I'd never dreamed of. For 2 weeks, the place was a construction zone. I served coffee from a folding table out front, wearing a hard hat like it was part of the uniform. Customers still came, some just to check in, some to drop off pastries, some to bring tools and help. On the day the city inspector arrived, I was a wreck. He walked around, clipboard in hand, nodding silently. Finally, he looked up and said, "Everything checks out. You're good to go." I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until that moment. We reopened with a small sign on the door. Still here. Still brewing. The first Friday open mic after the reopening was the biggest yet. There was standing room only. People sang, read poems, told jokes. Someone even proposed to their girlfriend in the middle of the shop. She said yes. As I stood behind the counter, pouring drinks, I looked around at the laughter, the music, the light bouncing off the amber walls, and I realized something. I hadn't just built a coffee shop. I'd built a community, a place where people felt seen, welcomed, connected. And all of it started because a 55-year-old man lost his job and found an old espresso machine in his garage. 3 years later, business is better than ever. The chain across the street? Still there, but it doesn't scare me anymore. My customers aren't looking for the cheapest coffee or the flashiest ads. They're looking for something real. Every morning, I unlock the door, breathe in the rich smell of beans, and think about that rainy Thursday when I walked out of my old job with a cardboard box in my hands. Back then, I thought it was the worst day of my life. Turns out, it was the day everything began.